Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. As promised, here's my video offering my final thoughts on the character of Alita in Yukito Kishiro's Battle Angel Alita. I originally hadn't intended to do character-specific videos for this series because I really felt like it was possible to talk about each character at the end of their arcs and really give an idea of how they fit into the larger narrative at that point. But now that I've reached the end of the series, I realize that's not entirely true. I think Alita requires a little more careful dissection to really understand what's going on with her. Not because it's complicated, but because it plays out very slowly over the arc of the entire 9 volumes of the series. You can almost miss her arc as time goes on. Now, I understood the whole time I was reading this series from the very beginning that we were watching a character work out the differences between point A and point B on a spectrum, this competition between order and chaos, although I didn't really put it in those terms the first time I read the story. However, the first time I read Battle Angel Alita, I was under the impression that Alita was a very static character. She represented a balance point between these two opposing ideas, rather than progressively swinging back and forth between the two until she found a point of equilibrium, which now that I look back on it with a more critical eye, I can realize is actually what happens. So let's talk for a minute or two about how Alita explores each of these extremes in her character arc and then comes to her point of equilibrium. First, we see Alita as a naive innocent. Even though she is a very old person, at least by the standards of the scrapyard, we are presented to her as an amnesiac. She essentially has none of the benefits of the wisdom and experience she has already acquired, and she reverts to a state that is very naive and childlike. Right away, she is exposed to the chaotic and dangerous nature of the world she lives in. But she is also exposed to Daisuke Ito, who presents to her a role model for how to survive in this world without going too far to one extreme or the other. So right off the bat, Alita has a template to follow and a hurdle to overcome. So far, quite good. Her initial encounter with Makaku shows that she is capable of overcoming these hurdles, and that her greatest tool to do so is her compassion, not so much her Panzerkunst. Although her ability as a warrior is very important to who Alita is and how she will confront obstacles, it is ultimately her compassion that wins the day in most of her encounters. From there, Alita meets Hugo and begins her trip to the chaotic extreme of her personality. Hugo doesn't take her all the way there, but it is her indulgence of Hugo and his wild desires and equally wild extremes of methodology to fulfill those desires that pushes Alita down the dark road that eventually leads her to her lowest point. 2 things are notable in this situation. First, in her confrontation with Zappin, she does not demonstrate her characteristic compassion. This will have consequences down the line. Second, when she is dealing with Hugo, her compassion is not sufficient to bring him back from the brink, and he dies in his attempt to reach Zalem. After Hugo's death, she joins Motorball, strictly to indulge her own desire for thrill-seeking. It requires the combined forces of Jashugan the Emperor and Dr. Ito to push Alita back out of her extreme indulgence and back into awareness of the people around her and how her actions affect those she cares about. At that point, she may appear to be in balance, but in truth, she is really only restrained by her relationships with Doc Ito and Shimura, 2 people who saw her at her lowest point and helped drag her back to stability. Thus, when she must face her karma, and Zappin comes back in the Berserker body, we see that the semblance of order that she has built is easily swept away. In her attempt to rebuild herself, she is forced to ally with the forces of Zalem and becomes an agent of unrepentant order. Chaos is totally removed from her life for a time, and she actually spends her time enforcing the pitiless laws of the factories for about 10 years. The pendulum there begins to swing back after she meets Figure and begins to grapple with how high-handed and detached from reality she has become. Alita still enjoys thrill-seeking, but that desire is entirely hemmed in by the people in Zalem who hold her leash. Yes, her impulses have been put into order, but again, not by Alita. and not by anyone who cares for her either. This is not the ideal instantiation of order in human life. It is not balanced against her desires and her impulses, it just crushes them. It is Figure who offers Alita an opportunity to rediscover the constructive side of her chaotic impulses, and rekindles her sense for romance that has been pretty much absent since Hugo's death. Eventually, the restraints on Alita's impulses change from her essential slavery to the people in Salem to her deeply personal relationships with Figure and Lou. We see this embodied first and foremost in her willingness to pass on a new romantic relationship with Chaos in favor of maintaining her bonds with Figure, and then again as she navigates her bloodlust and Lou's desire to do the best by the people of the surface, even as she serves as a representative for Salem. A confrontation with Den allows Alita the opportunity to confront and order the competing interests in her life, and come to the realization that she has to sort them some way or another, or she's never going to be able to accomplish the things she has set out for herself to do. The Granite Inn sequence, where she confronts first Jeshugen and then Nova in the Ouroboros, serves as an opportunity for Alita to confront the worst aspects of her personality that she hasn't quite sorted yet. Alita has been happy to be a girl in love, or a valiant warrior defending the scrapyard, but she's never really had to balance these two things at any one point in time. Except for the incident with Hugo, of course, which was, again, her biggest mistake. Clearly, she's been avoiding this kind of confrontation since then, first and most obviously in the way she threw herself into Motorball and disregarded all her other personal connections. However, even as one of the Tuned, she eschewed human connection, at least until she encountered Figure. This erratic method of bouncing back and forth between the two extremes was really unhealthy and clearly very destructive to Alita herself and everything around her. Harmonizing them enough to overcome Jeshugen is the key to Alita becoming fully present in the moment and being able to act with greatest effect to overcome the problems she confronted. We see that paid off in her confrontation with Nova, again in the Ouroboros machine. In this dreamscape, we find that Alita's compassion has fully reasserted itself, and she is able to forge a human connection even with Nova himself, a character who had, so far, completely eschewed this connection so he could remain at the chaotic extreme of human nature. With her greatest advantage returned to her, Alita is then in a position to demonstrate she still understands the other side. She strikes down Nova physically because, well, he's still a bad guy. Yes, she empathizes with him. She has compassion for his situation, but she also knows that she cannot leave him to do what he has been doing all this time. She's kind of tricked here because, of course, Nova isn't actually dead, and he does kind of turn the tables on her and take her to Salem for a short time, but ultimately, this works out for the good. Because she has established this compassionate human connection with Nova, she is able to, when the time comes, wring the trigger from him so she can transform the Amagnos body into the Tree of Life and save Salem from a fiery crash into the surface, showing that Alita is not just spiritually but physically the point of balance between Salem and the surface world, between order and chaos. It's a very deep and very slow-moving character arc that involves about one step of character growth per volume, sometimes two. Kishiro manages to do all of this without feeling repetitive or derivative, and constantly presenting us with new obstacles and new spins on the old questions that keep the stories fresh and Alita feeling like she's being challenged, not just physically in her fights, but on an emotional and on a moral level as she works to sort out these very difficult hurdles she has to overcome. All in all, it's a very impressive bit of character writing and one that I think I have undersold, even though I've always been a big fan of this story. It's my hope by laying it all out for you in this single recap video, you can also appreciate the skill and thoughtfulness with which this character arc was executed. And with that, I think I've truly said everything I have to say about Kishiro's Battle Angel Alita. Hopefully you've enjoyed listening to these thoughts. I've certainly enjoyed sharing them with you. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.